than that, and over to you.
Yeah, I'm the Executive VP for Africa for Spectrum, and been asked here this afternoon to talk about deep water hotspots. And it's not just going to look at Africa, but also outside Africa. And I suppose probably the real definition of a hotspot is when your geoscience director calls you up about 2 days before the presentation and says, I can't make it. And obviously that was a little bit of a surprise to me, and I do give Neil's apologies on his behalf. Clearly he hasn't, from my point of view, hasn't apologised enough for him being unable to present here this afternoon, so I will do my best to go through Neil's presentation, and if you will excuse me every now and then as I maybe pause a little bit to reflect on some of the slides, but hopefully at least give you an idea of where we're looking. And I think when we talk about hotspots, I think we really are talking about it from our perspective. You know, there's a whole spectrum across the industry, from exploration, production, development, and everyone's idea of what's a hotspot, I'm sure, is going to relate to what their part of the industry is. And I think what we're going to look at here is particularly our definition of a hotspot. You know, it may be that there's been no or very little drilling, very little exploration, and so obviously on the production development side, that may not be considered a hotspot, and we might be looking 5, 10 years into the future before, as that part of the industry becomes a hotspot. So as Neil's likened here, we're trying to spot the wave ahead of the crowd, and the crowd being, if you like, the rest of the whole process that goes into exploration. And obviously if that's Neil there about to be hit by a large wave, well, that's just going to have to happen. So what are we looking for in terms of new areas? And trying to think ahead of where we're next going to be. And I think from a G&G perspective, it's finding those thick sediment piles where there's a mechanism for hydrocarbons to be generated. Where in the world are there still the potential ingredients for a working petroleum system that haven't yet been investigated or explored? And I guess from our point of view, we have an ever-growing seismic database, so that does give us a view over a large library of where those areas might be. And of course, unsurprisingly, we may also try and put our seismic data in the future in those areas, again, to be ahead of the wave, so to speak. So I guess one of the pieces that's making a difference, and a big difference, is our ability to drill in deeper and deeper water. And obviously, from our point of view, you know, we again are looking further into the distance. We may not be looking specifically at technology, but we are nevertheless looking at where you'd be able to drill in deeper and deeper water. What are the areas you might want to explore in? Although it says here, political developments aside, from my point of view, on the commercial side, you know, political developments are a big piece of the picture, and there are many areas that will open up or may open up for exploration that for political reasons we haven't been able to explore previously. So at first glance, and this was Neil and his team, you know, we'll be looking for areas where that large sedimentary pile exists. And as you can see here in this worldwide map of, if you like, the thickness of the sedimentary sequence, there are a lot of these areas that in Brazil, etc., that have already been heavily explored, but there's still a lot of areas around the world that haven't been explored and that may still have a fairly thick sedimentary sequence. One of the first ingredients of a working petroleum system, and what we're going to look at is some of those areas now. But in terms of making any realistic progress in these areas, we can look at opportunities in very deep water, but there needs to be the ability to actually access these targets. And what we're really looking at here was not only the development of deep water drilling, and here in this case for Repsol, but also I guess what Neil termed the democratization of technology and access to technology. This ability for the industry to, through a lot of the large service companies, to access the ability to drill in ever deeper water. And just an example here, taking Repsol's drilling history in terms of water depths up to almost 2,800 metres, most recently in Brazil. And the point there being that, you know, in terms of specialisation, you might not necessarily think of Repsol as a deep water specialist. The technology has been opened up, and actually I understand that the deepest water well currently drilled is by ONGC, over 3,000 metres. So that access technology is one piece, and the other piece is just identifying the areas for new opportunities, and that's what Neil's team have been working very hard to do. So the areas I'm going to focus on in this presentation, I'm going to look at three areas. Two areas we have some data in, and one area we don't, so we're looking ahead to where we may want to be rather than where we currently are. And so if we start to mark out, certainly in this region around Africa and South America, the areas that we consider already currently hot, you know, and that's hot because there's lots of exploration activity, there's lots of existing production development, it's already a very mature area. And you can see in Africa and South America there, and also Northwest Africa, a lot of the areas, I think you'd probably consider them to be in sort of the current visibility for activity. So we're going to take a look at some of the areas that maybe not so high on the shopping list at the moment. And these are what could be future hotspots. And obviously the part of our story here is to look at whether there are enough ingredients here to make this of interest. So one is the area in southeast of Brazil and Uruguay. The other area we're going to look at is Northwest Africa, a little bit closer to home for me. And then finally, we're going to look at offshore Portugal. And just try and put together some of the pieces that may give us some clues as to whether these opportunities are worth exploring in the future. So we'll start here, firstly, in called Area 1, in the Pilotis Basin in Uruguay. We're going to focus on this area here where we have some 2D data on the border with Brazil. And I guess the speculation at the moment is there's uncertainty about the source rocks. Is there a reservoir there? Are there really structures there that might hold reservoirs of sufficient size to warrant exploring this area? So the big question, will this be a future hotspot or not? And I'll give you some of the ingredients that we'll look at and see whether this could be a place for future exploration. So it is in ultra deep water. So it's as you can see there, we're down to 4 seconds two-way travel time. So we're really looking at what's been described as near future exploration technologies. We speculate that we can move into ever deep water environments. It's on a steep depositional slope, which obviously is the case being in such deep water, but it has a very thick sedimentary section of greater than 5,000 metres. So the pieces there are there to produce a working petroleum system. So the question is there a source, a reservoir, and a trap? So, and Neil thought this would buy me at least 30 seconds. So just looking at the opening up at the Atlantic here, and part of the picture is just to look at the conjugate margins, you know, see what we can learn from looking at the developments across both sides of the Atlantic, and see how this gives us some clues as to what the potential may be. So here what we've done is we've looked to fairly simply reconstruct across the South Atlantic between Uruguay and the Lotus Basin in Namibia to about 120 million years ago, and see if we can start to look at the source question. And certainly in Uruguay at the moment, that's an unknown for the source, but yet if we go across into Namibia, and we go to the Apto Albion, laying down as the Atlantic opened up. In Namibia, we know we have a working source in the Apto Albion, as we can see as we look at the seaward dipping reflectors here on either side of the margin, we can be fairly confident that in reconstructing that it doesn't take too much to postulate that you also have a working source going across here into Uruguay. And you can see on top right here, we have just a line through here. So putting these pieces together, we can start to speculate that even though it hasn't been tested with a drill bit, there's a very strong possibility that you would have a working source in Uruguay. So if we look at the actual time in the plate reconstruction, here about 110 million years ago, we can see that we have the Atlantic opening up, and I understand now that the thinking is more that that the Falklands Plateau here made it a very restricted access into the Atlantic, so the USGS identified here, so anoxic conditions and excellent conditions for the development of a source rock has been identified already in Namibia. So again, we start to put those pieces together and can speculate that we have a working source in Uruguay. And if we look at some of the 2D examples from the Pilotis Basin, we can see these Aptian subbasins or mini basins here where we can speculate that we have a source. And we look here at the base of the slope, we have a characteristic that could well be a classic for turbidites coming off the shelf, stacked and ponded in basin floor fans. And then maybe as we move further up in the sequence, we can see the characteristic more of shale than turbidites. So again, we're moving on to the reservoir piece. There's also a good case that we'd have a potential reservoir there. In terms of the seal, then we may have up-dip seals with the shales as the turbidites come off the shelf, and have sealing of these reservoirs going up-dip. And then if we look in the cross-line direction at this location, we can see that potentially there's a very large closure at this particular location. So in terms of water depth and drilling depth, it is challenging, but if we're playing the game of looking further out into the future, these may be the sort of opportunities that we're starting to think about, and just a scale of 160 kilometres. So this is one of the areas we're looking at as a potential new hotspot, and I think get very excited about these sort of opportunities, and this is our chance to come and show you what we're looking at. Looking at the second area is going to focus on, again, obviously involved in the opening up of the Atlantic, here in the MSG Basin, so down from Mauritania, Senegal and Guinea Bissau. Again, in terms of activity, probably less focused than some of the other areas in Africa, West Africa, Angola, and now obviously East Africa. And it's relatively, in that context, underexplored. The exploration has largely been on the shelf. There's been some oil discoveries at Chouf in Mauritania, gas in Senegal, and oil shows down in Guinea Bissau. But largely confined to the shelf. So again, we ask ourselves the question, are there future opportunities here or not? And there is a fair amount of open acreage available. So looking specifically at in this area, we had a look at Guinea Bissau. As I said, the current exploration is really sort of focused on early Cretaceous deltaics around and diapirs, and certainly hasn't moved as yet really into the deeper water. So we take this back in the reconstruction about 180 million years ago. We see a sort of this asymmetric splitting of the margin, and although in a sense Guinea-Bissau is not the exact conjugate of Suriname in terms of the actual development of the basins, we can look here for some analogues between Suriname and Guinea-Bissau, and again a fairly sort of restricted margin with influxes of the sea. So again, we do the same sort of thing. We just start pulling together the two halves of the margin and have a look at reconstructing the section at that particular point in time. So here, I was going to say how many million years ago, I think it's about 180 million years ago, and see how we can put this piece together. So just open the, if I press the right button, it will help. So just sort of reconstructing a section through here, up through Suriname, and through into Guinea Bissau. And the first question we have to ask ourselves, well, can we make something look better in terms of the source story? Well, again, if we take this part of the picture and map between the two areas, we have a well drilled in here, which was dry, but it proved and penetrated the early Jurassic source rocks in Suriname. And if we take that across the conjugate margin into Guinea Bissau, where there hasn't been any drilling down to the early Jurassic or in the deep water, we can again speculate that if that is a good analogue, which could well be given the reconstruction, that we may well have a very good source in Guinea Bissau, based on putting these pieces together and recent drilling. The other part of the picture, obviously in terms of reservoir, where it's established in Guinea Bissau from some of the earlier drilling, that there is a proven clastic system, Albion clastic delta. So the ingredients are there for a reservoir, which unfortunately at that location in Suriname wasn't present, but it can at least for us prove that the possibility of the source working is very high. And then finally, when we come and look at the structural piece, we take another line from Guinea-Bissau, and it's a pretty long line. It's about 265 kilometres, so obviously it's quite compressed, but certainly structurally there is the opportunity of all other elements in the petroleum system are there, that again you have something in the deeper water that has yet not been explored, but may well have the potential for future discoveries. So two very interesting areas. Certainly we can look at those and say there's some very good ingredients there for that could lead to potential future success. And finally, the third area is in the Galicia Basin, offshore Portugal, and not a very heavily explored area, nor with a huge amount of data, and in this case, not a huge amount of our data either, in fact, none of our data. But there is some existing data here, but nothing really going out into the deeper water, and we're just here on the border between Spain and Portugal. So looking at the analogue here, actually if we reconstruct, we're actually going across the Guia Basin with the Hibernia discovery. And again, we can have a look at the story and see if there's a picture we can put together that maybe again gives some encouragement. This is an area that we should be looking at. Obviously, Hibernia with a huge billion-barrel discoveries, and of course in Portugal you have the luxury of none of that ice floating around, or at least none that I've seen. So operationally, if you can forgive it for being slightly deeper water, certainly a much more favourable environment to operate in. So when we look at this and we look at the nascent rifts in the North Atlantic, as the Atlantic was opening up to the north, we had these rift grabens that developed in around Hibernia. I have a section here through the field, and we can again postulate that those very similar rift grabens would have developed offshore Portugal. Now, there isn't a huge amount of data in the deeper water. In fact, looking at the map, there's probably none. But this the schematic that we have from the area would suggest that its structural style was fairly similar. These rifted grabens, looking quite close in character to what you might see, and again with a proven source in the Jurassic in Hibernia. We can again start to speculate, and obviously for our part of the business at the moment, that speculation would start with acquiring new data and see if that part of the story fits together. and obviously we may come back in sometime in the future and show you examples from this area, and we'll see whether our speculation was right or not. So those are the three areas I wanted to look at, just to give you a flavour for where we're looking at the future, areas where we have certainly a lot of enthusiasm about, and we're either currently active or will be active, and so I'll just share with you our thoughts. So just to run through, these are the three areas that we've been looking at, and may well, obviously we hope, will become hot areas in the future. Speculation is correct, and our investment in these areas as well. Offshore Pilotis, so there's massive deep water potential, we believe, at the base of the slope there, and all the necessary elements for a working petroleum system. Also Guinea Bissau, we believe we can put some of the pieces of the petroleum system into place by reconstructing the margin, and also there are some huge structures there, so there is certainly value in pursuing those opportunities, given the fact that the petroleum system, if it works and you have traps, you'll know you're going to have big fields. And finally, the look-alike for the Geological Basin across into Portugal, where certainly further work needs to be done. But again, we believe that that's an area that's worth looking to in the future. And finally, just to conclude, I take Neil's view on this, that you are trying to ride the wave, but apparently you have to ride the right wave, and if you don't, as many things in life, you're going to come across a shark and you're going to get eaten alive. So I leave those choices to you, and obviously we will try and help you on the way. You know, it's a key part of the game, I think, is trying to choose which is the right way to go, and only the future will tell, and we look forward to taking part in that future and seeing how it works out. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. Time for a couple of questions, and if nobody else puts their hand up, I will ask you one. How do you actually, you know, I mean, choosing new places to go is a bit like politics. You know, if you listen to the Today programme, you can hear 5 different people giving 10 different views. How do you actually decide? Who do you listen to? Are there some voices more important than others? Or who do you listen to?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there are many different voices, and you listen to lots, and sometimes you make the right decision and listen to the right voices, and sometimes you don't. I guess a lot of the process is a combination, as always. We do a lot of review and evaluation within Spectrum, within the geoscience team, within Neil's group, and often a lot of the ideas will be thrown out from the studies and the work that they undertake, and we live within a community that involves governments, our clients, and really it's a matter of communicating with the industry and bouncing around ideas and seeing which collection of ideas seems to sort of build the most weight behind them. And when we look at that, we decide whether that's the right place to go. So I guess the answer is always, as in many cases, it's a combination of factors.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you for that.
Thank you.